I'm Megan.
I'm CJ.
And I'm Erica.
And this is the Her Podcast.
Today we are sitting down with non-diet dietitian Brooke Bulloch. Brooke founded Food to Fit Nutrition, a Saskatchewan-based nutrition counseling company where she leads a team of specialized registered dietitians and social workers and practices from a weight-inclusive lens using self-compassion, science-based nutrition, and food relationship counseling. We went all over the place here, you guys. From restrictive eating cycles, how trauma can affect a person's nutrition, the misconceptions about disordered eating, and how there's actually differences between an eating disorder and disordered eating, which I really didn't know about. How to deal with a picky eater, the shocking stat about eating disorders in our own kids here in Canada, and the best way that we can work on educating ourselves and our families and others around us around food. This is so good. Brooke drops a ton of knowledge and really opened our eyes on how we can approach food in our own lives.
That's what I always say,
I don't think I'd get anything done.
I don't know. Well,
I
Erica
don't
has
know.
3. So,
And you do a really good
She's
job
the
of
queen.
keeping them off of social.
I used to have them on social a lot. When I started Instagram, I was like, I'm a mommy blogger, so I need to have my kids on. And then my husband was always kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I never said where I lived. Like, I was very careful. And then one day, my kids were at a park with my dad. And afterwards, I got a DM from someone who literally said, oh my gosh, I saw your dad and your kids at the park, and I said hi, and your dad was the friendliest person. And this was a very kind follower who is a very loyal follower of mine, loves all my stuff. Mm-hmm. She's a mom, but I was like, oh,
you recognize my kids.
you recognize my children. Yeah. And Nick was like, no, we're done. And my kids are so friendly. Mm-hmm. My kids are just hi, but they wouldn't. I was like, we need to change this. So now they're on tiny bits, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Because it is still a part of my life and I want to share my life.
It's a lot to think about, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I generally, when Asher was little, I used to put him on once in a while or in stories. And then Andrew and I similarly were like, I don't think it's necessary. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, so if I do share, it's a photo, one of our family photos, Asher's face is turned the other way, or we're, it's a cute, our mm-hmm. hands or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's I am a mom, but you're not going to see him.
Well, and I don't mind, I have this reel that I'm kind of waiting to post because it's Beatrice and she's dirt biking. So I'm I'm okay sharing that because she's in a helmet and she's all suited up, and it's but I wouldn't share, and I'm not, let me preface by saying I'm not knocking anyone who does share their children on social media. I'm not, that's not what I'm saying. But my kids in bathing suits and stuff like that. And I have done that in the past. I've done bathing suit ads before mm-hmm. with all my kids and me. And I'm just where are these going to end up?
Yeah. You just don't know.
You just don't know what's going to happen. And so the little I can control.
Yeah,
I will.
Yeah. I like how you said that.
There was, I remember that I was posting some photos from Mexico. I don't know when. It must have been last year. And it was a picture of Fletcher without his shirt on
mm-hmm.
in his swimsuit, and it was just a selfie, and I was like, I need to take that off.
Yeah,
it felt weird.
Yeah,
it's no.
And it's that little thing that if you're thinking it, it's okay, well, my intuition is just saying something here.
Yeah.
I would love to jump in. You are a non-diet registered dietitian. Can you tell us what that means?
That's a loaded question.
I know, no. Right? That's why I asked it.
Ultimately, it means that we sort of meet the client where they're at, and we remove weight loss as a way to reach health. And so there's a lot to it, a lot of layers, but ultimately we will provide the assessment. We will allow them some space to tell their story. We will, help them with setting goals or intentions. We will support them to improve a chronic condition or whatever it may be, to manage whatever it may be going on or to recover. But we don't have any parameters around weight. So we will never recommend weight loss to achieve health. If someone is recovering from an eating disorder, we would not have any, weight parameters around in terms of how much they might need to gain for recovery. So weight is not necessarily removed from the table because people have weight concerns. So we do hold space for those weight concerns. And it's impossible not to have weight concerns in our weight-obsessed society. So there's a lot of bias around size and weight in society, in institutions, in the medical system, and that bias can lead to stigma and discrimination. And I mean, we see it all the time. So we just want to remove that pressure. It ultimately also says that ethically, we can't guarantee what a person's size or shape is going to do when they're, receiving care from us. So we can't guarantee weight loss. People might lose weight. They might gain weight, they might maintain their weight. It depends. And they might gain weight in terms of if they're really restricting and there's recovery. But we just kind of try to remove that pressure. And so non-diet just means we don't use BMI as a marker of health. We don't use weight as a marker of
Which
health.
is body mass.
Body mass index.
Okay, so
Yes.
I want to ask about the BMI because I did one kinesiology class in university and it was actually so fun. I really did enjoy it. But I remember we talked a lot about the BMI and we had to go and do all these, what would it be called? Like clinical things, outside of the actual classroom. We'd have to measure ourselves and figure out our BMI.
Right.
But I've seen some things that are the BMI is so ancient and not accurate. And can you speak to that at all? Because for years I've been in university my BMI said I would be healthy at this weight, so I need to get to that weight, and it's only been in the last, I would actually say, couple of years that I've been
Well, is it weight and size?
Yeah, so it's a calculation that measures your weight based on your height in meters squared. So it was actually put together by...
I was meters squared.
Great math.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it was a calculation put together by a mathematician.
Who was a man.
White man, in the 1800s. And how he came about it was, and he studied white, male, French and Scottish subjects. So the BMI is based on a very limited
pool.
Yeah. So it's not really meant, it was never actually meant to be used as a marker of individual health anyway. And what we know about the BMI is that there's a lot of studies just to show that it's really not a good marker of health. It really is such. They're arbitrary numbers. There are associations. So, for example, people with a very high BMIs, there are associations with chronic condition or disease. But what we need to know is association is not cause and effect, is not causation. So when people hear, it's again very stigmatizing. People know their BMI when they come in to see us. Many people do. And they know if they're quote unquote overweight or quote unquote O-word. We don't even use it in our practice because it is stigmatizing. So when they hear that, some people feel like it's almost a death sentence. They get very scared about it.
Right.
And so instantly that is causing harm to their health. But we know that there are associations with higher body weight and certain disease risk. But again, it's not that we can read the science and say, high body weight causes heart disease. High body weight causes diabetes. That is not true, not even a little bit. So what is actually, and there's a lot of really excellent research coming out looking at the role of weight discrimination and other forms of discrimination and racism on a person's health.
Yes.
So it's not just about size and BMI. So this is another reason why we just don't use it. And also in the 14 years I've been working as a dietitian, it just hasn't been a helpful tool.
Right.
It creates fixation and obsession with size and weight. And what I found, so I've been in private practice for 11 years. And when I started, I thought I had to be a weight loss dietitian. And I thought, okay, so I need to get good at this. And I mean, we did all the things and all the tricks, everything that diet culture would tell you to do. And what I started learning was that people have really complex lives. And sometimes there's trauma history, and sometimes there's mental health issues, and sometimes they're busy parents. Like there's just so many layers to people. And fixating on body weight, what it did was it created distrust between me and the client. They didn't believe that I knew what I was doing. I didn't trust that they were reporting. I didn't like that. So luckily it was very short-lived. But what I did find was that working with them, even if there weren't big weight shifts or none at all, people were changing eating patterns that they felt good, that felt good in their body, that served them well. And also we were seeing improved markers of health. So when we look at blood work, or when we look at energy levels, or when we look at menstrual cycles, or whatever markers that we're looking at, I work a lot in functional gut issues. So, it would be sort of measuring how their gut is functioning.
How are you measuring that? Can I ask that? I'm so curious about gut health. So I'm on my own gut health journey. So I'd love to know.
Yeah. So everything from like the throat all the way down to the exit.
Yes.
That's gut health? I literally just think about your gut, like your stomach.
Well, gastrointestinal. So we use the gut as, a reference to like stomach and intestines. But functional gut issues can affect, everything from reflux and just swallowing issues all the way down to chronic bloating and diarrhea or chronic constipation, and as well as pain. And so predominantly, I support folks with irritable bowel syndrome, but sometimes they have issues outside of
their bowels.
Yeah.
What are some of the common issues that are associated with gut health that like we wouldn't even think about? Because when I think okay, IBS, bloating. But what are some things that are underlying that? Like when you said swallowing, I was like, oh, I guess that would be.
Yeah, so sometimes if there's chronic reflux, not everybody feels it with heartburn. So that could be like a lump in the throat. So I usually start there. So we kind of start, neck down. So in terms of assessing for symptoms. So a lump in the throat or like having to swallow multiple times can be a sign of reflux, even though they don't feel the heartburn. So obviously assessing for heartburn. But also there is something called eosinophilic esophagitis. To be honest, I'm not that one. Yeah, we shorten it.
You guys don't know about that? Come on.
Erica's like, I studied that in kinesiology.
It's certainly not my expert area, but it's certainly something that I would just, loosely assess for. And basically, it's an overgrowth of eosinophils and inflammation in the esophagus, and that can cause a lot of uncomfortable symptoms. So it would just be looking, assessing for that. Moving down, it would be looking at, so when people come to me saying, I'm bloated, that's not enough. We have to dig into, okay, where is that bloating? How does it feel? And what are the symptoms? So is the bloating up high, above the belly button, underneath the ribs? And does that create any kind of belching or pain? Sometimes even back pain, which would be more like a functional dyspepsia. Or is it below the belly button where there's pain or not, or just distension, which is also associated with gas, and sometimes a change in stool output, so diarrhea or constipation. And then is it just air, or is it really smelly gas? Because that could be a sign of the types of foods that are being fermented in the large colon. So there's lots of investigation, lots of questions to unpack a lot of that stuff. I know, totally nerding out right now.
I love
it. It's so good. I love that.
You touched on how trauma can affect the body and the health and nutrition. So I'm curious how you see trauma and also just like lifestyle, mental health affecting nutrition in your body and how you're digesting.
So I'm definitely not a trauma expert. And so we do have a social worker on our team. But I think when we talk about practicing from a trauma-informed lens, it's really, again, holding some space for the client to tell their story so that we can understand if there is some level of trauma, which, by the way, restricted eating and a lifetime of dieting can have some level of trauma. And a lot of people will even remember a time back when they were a teenager or a child when someone said something, and that's, they know the exact moment, and that's when things changed for them. That's when they learned that their body wasn't wrong, that their body was wrong, or that it wasn't acceptable, or that it needed to change. So all of those little comments that can be made from a family member, or, and well-intentioned. We do not throw family members under the bus because everyone is a victim of diet culture, but people will remember the exact time when they remember that. So when they learned that, perhaps I should be shrinking my body. So from there, and again, it can be anything that happened in childhood. Trauma, we know, is not just one big event. It can be multiple, small events, microaggressions, anything like that. So it's really just understanding if there is trauma, what that could be, and just how can I avoid re-traumatizing. So from there, certainly, we know that trauma can affect mental health. And so, again, one of the assessment questions is, how is your mood and mental health? A, to break the stigma. Let's just get talking about it.
Yeah.
B, to ensure that if people are struggling, that I can maybe bridge the gap and get them connected to somebody. And C, a lot of people don't realize that, oh, wow, I really am struggling with my mood. And yes, that is probably why I don't have the capacity to put together meals sometimes. And what they say to me is, I'm just lazy. I have no motivation. And I said, it's not laziness. That is just that's a weird societal judgment term. That is not actually what's going on. You are not a lazy person. Let's dig deeper. And it's like, oh, yeah, I think I might be really struggling with my mood and this change in life and whatever. So we talk a lot about capacity and whatnot. So how this relates to nutrition is the capacity to feed yourself, to feed your family, to put meals or snacks together, to pack and go. And if people don't have the capacity, then again, we need to be planning in a way that is so that they don't feel like a failure, because I think a lot of the messaging, I don't know about you, but I see even on social media, dietitians too, but nutritionists, showcasing what they're meal planning. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I just like, I couldn't even do that.
I'm lucky if I remember to take meat out of the freezer. And now you want me to like plan all these meals. And with the way I am, I'm like, I will get to day 3 and be like, I don't want to eat that anymore. Or now my kids are pitching a fit because they don't want that. So I find that to be extremely true for myself. I look at meal planning and I'm like, I don't even know how to begin that process because it's so overwhelming.
Which I'm curious, like how you would give someone tips to, and you probably do this like within your practice, but in general, if someone's listening and feeling like Erica and you're like, how do you even begin to meal plan and put together some of those things?
And
start out.
I have something called micro meal planning.
Okay.
It's meal planning for people who hate meal planning because it's me.
Amazing. Let's hear it.
So ultimately too, if that were somebody's goal and that's what we decided, maybe they're really struggling with dinners, because oftentimes you get to the end of the day and I mean, anybody, including me, is like exhausted from their day, no matter what you're doing. And the last thing you want to think about is what's for supper. And it is the hardest you make so many decisions in a day. So decision fatigue, mental fatigue, getting home, like that is the last thing you have capacity for. So micro meal planning to help with that is once a week, and I help the clients figure out the day that is right for them.
Right.
So it might be a morning over coffee while the kids are watching some TV. And I also say set a timer for 15 minutes. We are not spending a lot of time on this.
Okay, because when I think of meal planning, I'm like, okay, you got to get out the containers and all of the different things, and like it's going to take a long time. Yeah,
and I think it can feel like a little bit more when you're first starting out, but we do want to take the path of least resistance, like always. I mean, I try to be efficient around this too, but... So sit down and plan out 3 separate meals for the following week, and that's it. That's all you're doing. And I pick 3 because I will not do 5. 5 feels like, no, no, I'm not, it's too much. Sometimes I will get to 4, which is a bonus.
Yeah.
But if I just tell myself 3, my capacity is like, yep, sure, I can do that. And then we might focus on categories like, is there a poultry? Is there a meat? Is there a plant-based option? Whatever it may be that fits within their needs or their goals. And then around that, it would be, balancing the plate. So, adding that starch or vegetable. But basically planning out the 3 meals, not all of them brand new recipes. Definitely not. Like pick some go-tos, things that you know that the kids are going to, maybe that the kids like, that the family likes. But from there, after you have your 3 meals, write them on a calendar, put the ingredients on a grocery list, figure out other things that you need. And I can also help a little bit with managing the grocery list. So just mentally, fruits and vegetables. Do we need any milk and alternatives or plant-based options? Do we need meats? Do we need, going through the categories? And that's where you might have a quick look in your freezer or your pantry, just so you're not doubling up, and managing food waste as well. But from there, you buy the groceries. But what you do is when you get home and you're exhausted, you look on the calendar and like, oh, we're eating that. Okay, I still have to cook, but it takes a mountain into a molehill. So it's still a little bit of work. And then people say, okay, what about the other days? You only planned 3. So I always remind people that there's usually probably a takeout day for most families.
Yep.
And I actually encourage that if it's within their financial means, because it can just be a fun thing to do. It can just ease, again, chores and financial emotional burden of planning meals. And usually the other 2 days, there's a weekend, so there's a little bit more time and capacity. And then there's always your easy go-tos.
I love that. Anyone else out there have a favorite treat that is so special to you, you hide it from your significant other and anyone who might get into it? I've fallen in love with a new organic dark chocolate bar, and full disclosure, I absolutely hid the first couple bars from my husband before he caught me eating one, which at that point I shared with him, and he loves them just as much as me. Let me introduce you to the chocolate bar. It's from Cult Chocolate, your new must-have, locally made here in Saskatoon chocolate bars. Cult chocolate bars are made of pure organic dark chocolate loaded with antioxidants, minerals, and healthy fats. And they're also dairy-free, which for all my lactose intolerant friends out there like me is such a win. Cult has 6 signature flavors: vanilla, mocha, sea salt, coconut, orange, and mint. And I've had a really hard time choosing my favorite. They're all so delicious. You guys know I'm a branding fanatic, and so I have to take a moment to talk about the packaging, because you guys, this is not your basic chocolate bar. Each flavor has its own beautifully designed packaging that is also biodegradable. You can now shop them on their website at cultchocolate.ca. That's cultchocolat.ca. You're going to leave out the E and use code HERPODCAST to save 10% off of your order. Or if you want to save even more, they offer a chocolate membership, you guys. When you sign up for a Cult monthly subscription, you're going to save 20% while also getting free shipping, a yearly birthday gift, and a free bonus surprise feature bar exclusive to the box. Join the Cult at cultchocolate.ca, where you'll also find a list of local retailers, and find them at Cult Chocolate on Instagram. And remember to use code HERPODCAST to save 10% off of your order.
I found I tried meal planning for a while, and I go through these phases, which is so me. And I'd be like, I'm going to meal plan for 5 days a week. And then the struggle I had is I would have leftovers. So I'd be like, well, I don't want to make a new meal when I have leftovers. Because I don't want to waste food. And then as soon as that started happening, which is great to adopt, and I've adopted it now, I would be like, well, now I can move this meal down here. And then I would forget about it. And it just became this I have so many groceries. I have so many things I should be making because I made this plan. And it was so overwhelming that it'd be everyone's getting cereal tonight because mommy doesn't know what to make. Right. And I think I love what you said about not new meals and meals that are easy. Because I think sometimes and this was a shift for me, I would never do easy meals in the evening. for the longest time I was like, it has to be like meat, potatoes, veggies, like the most classic farm wife vibe. And then I'm now working in the capacity I'm working, and I'd come home and I'd be like, okay, I got to make like this big grand meal and make sure there's all these things. First of all, I have 3 children who are eating like this much at a meal. And one day I was like, I am making grilled cheese and tomato soup. And I'm like, I know this is like supposed to be a Sunday lunch thing, but I was like, tonight this is supper, because it's more important to eat than not eat.
Absolutely.
And give myself the grace that tomorrow maybe I can make the nice big meal, but today it's about just giving that break.
Well, and I imagine like the end of the day, the supper meal is probably the hardest meal. Like I really like how you touched on decision fatigue, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about how many decisions we've made throughout the day, and that burden when you get to the end and you're like, we just want to pile one more thing on there, right? And you're like, no, that's not realistic actually, right?
It's also very similar with snacks and planning lunches. Sometimes I'll encourage the parent, whoever is the predominant person shopping and managing that, is just pick the same lunch for the whole week and pick the same snacks for the whole week. It's
amazing.
fine. And then, or maybe 1 or 2, and then the next week you can swap it out. But I also do this for, busy adults. So when they're packing their lunch and snack, maybe they'll switch out their lunch day to day, especially if you are someone who takes leftovers. But if it's like, okay, I still need a mid-afternoon snack, you can pack the same snack every day for those 5 days, swap it out the next week, so that you're not standing, because especially for people with who identify as neurodiverse, or for example, people with ADHD sometimes get very overwhelmed with decisions, and if there's too many options.
diagnosis. So this is so that's why I'm like,
validating.
it can be like
the diagnosis.
Well, and just so much of like, there's too much to look at, or or I don't know. And again, I don't want to take away from you speaking, but like I had to adopt, I would like go to the grocery store and I'd buy like 7 fruits because I was like, I need variety.
Yes.
And then half of it would go bad because we only ate. So now like I will tell Nick, like I buy grapes, right? Like a big thing of grapes. And then he'll be like, you should go get grapes. And I'm like, no, I did grapes last week and we ate them and now we're sick of them. So if I know we like them still. So if I bring them home right now though, we're not going to. So I've tried to adopt almost like cycles of groceries.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll buy this time. And then once that's done, we'll take a break.
Yes.
So that it's not so boring and repetitive. But I make my kids the exact same lunch every day and they've never once complained. Like never, not once. Are they like, I don't like this they're like, this is great. I'm like, awesome.
I think there can be so much stress around variety, and there can be so much pressure. And we hear this a lot, variety is really important, and especially when it comes to gut health too. And there is some really good evidence showing that having 30 different types of plant foods in a week can be beneficial for the gut. So we would, people hear this and they're like, oh my gosh, it sounds like a lot, but it would be including everything you eat, from bread to garlic and onions to, if you have any beans, peanut butter, nuts, fruits, vegetables. And if you do 2 different fruits and 2 different, like you might notice it adds up quickly. But what we need to do with that, like, oh my gosh, 30 different, with that message, is bring down the overwhelm and simplify. And what, it's so important that even for somebody, I work with a lot of adults who were labeled a quote unquote picky eater as a child.
That was my next question.
So for kids, but also for adults, I work mostly with adults. When they come to me and they say, I am a picky eater, and it's like, let's unpack that a little bit. So we spend some time around like their childhood, their history, and people can live up to labels. It's so important not to label our children and ourselves. But it's like, you have a good reason for being a selective eater. Like, let's just lay that out, whatever it may be. And it can be a variety of reasons. And maybe they have a good goal of expanding their palate. But it's like, okay, well, let's start with non-pressure for one. But even within their limited palate, we can still create some variety in the day, even if there is 10 foods that they eat. So this idea of variety, it is somewhat ableist, and we want to again meet people with where they're at and not add pressure. pressure, whether it's pressure to restrict food for dieting or whether it's pressure to expand your palate because you're a picky eater, it has never been helpful in food and nutrition and changing your, whatever it may be, making changes to your dietary intake or changing your health or whatever it may be.
Can you speak to what's the differences between being like a picky eater, quote unquote, having a food aversion, and maybe having a disorder within eating?
So I would classify, quote unquote, picky eating and food aversion as the same thing.
Okay.
Like, there's an aversion to food for whatever reason. And for some people, it can be whether or not there's other, diagnoses going on, but some people are very sensitive to texture. Some people are super tasters and they taste, their taste buds are so much more sensitive. So they taste bitters so much more powerfully. Some kids, I think, can appear to be, quote unquote, picky or averted to food when really they're just overwhelmed with the eating environment. Okay. So again, this is where...
Speak to that.
Yeah.
And again, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but it's things that I learn through other dietitians working with children. And then as I work with adults who are trying to, heal the relationship and unwind from that. But, it's very rigid. We've all learned, sit at the table and eat.
Clear your
sit
plate.
on your bum. Clear your plate. Eat this before you get this. You have to earn your food. And a lot of those rigid rules can actually cause harm to especially kids who are neurodiverse, who maybe are overwhelmed with, the environment at the dinner table, or if they do find mealtime stressful. So even in our household, I've hesitated to say sit and eat. It's more like if he needs to stand and dance in the middle of the dance floor and come back to his plate. My 5-year-old, not my husband.
Hey, we never allow that too, maybe.
That's fine, and so being flexible with where he wants to eat. And anyway, it's a lot of it does come down to this sort of ableist and top-down approach to nutrition and dietetics. There's a lot of that we're learning as a team at Food to Fit Nutrition on how to better support people and work with their unique selves. It doesn't have to be a classic way. And again, a lot of us were raised with clean your plate, the clean your plate club, or earn your dessert. You need to eat this in order to get this. And it's no fault of any family member who's learned that or does that. Again, they did the best they could with the tools they had, but it's okay to say, maybe that wasn't the best thing for you. What do you think is going to work better for you as an individual? And then that's where we kind of help guide the process.
Well, I'm assuming that you would suggest that, and maybe you don't suggest this, so tell me if you don't, but like listening to your body when you're eating, right? Like, am I full? Am I hungry?
That's a great question, actually, and a great point. Yes, for people who are able to tune into their hunger and fullness cues. So that's another assessment question is, do you identify hunger and do you identify fullness? For people, so for example, people who are on a medication that might suppress appetite.
This is so good.
They don't identify hunger in the day, right?
Right.
Kids, adults.
Okay. I'm really glad that you clarified that.
Yeah. So then we can't trust hunger cues in that regard, but you still need to eat. So this is where we use more like mechanical eating for people who are easily distracted, and don't eat. For
you can just say Erica if you want.
Well, I was gonna say,
I'm not going to be offended if you're like, for people who ate it. I've had people be like, because I'm ADHD and now I'm on medication, I've had people, like my trainer, be like, you probably need to set an alarm to go eat.
Yes.
Because I get to the end of the day and not only am I not hungry, my appetite, like it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm just not hungry. I'll be like, I like don't even want to eat. Like, so
and
and I'm like,
And when your appetite does come back, when the medication wears off, we see sometimes binge-like behaviors, and which is okay. It's just whether or not it causes the person stress or, distress. So the other thing is that we know that a hungry brain is a more anxious brain. So just in terms of that mood and mental health, and then of course, just like literally fueling your body to get through the day. So we do talk a lot about this as a team, is like, supporting families with children or adults themselves to when to eat. So not everyone has a hunger cue. There's two other scenarios. One, the first is when someone has been dieting for a long time or chronic dieting. They have learned to mistrust their hunger cues and mistrust their body. So it's easy for them to tune that out and to ignore it to the point where they don't know. And there can be a lot of confusion. Like, am I hungry or is it just anxiety creating gas? And so we hear a lot of things and we are saying, yeah, no, you're probably hungry. But until they can build that trust. And the other thing is, again, if there's a level of trauma, it might not feel safe to tune into the body. So we need to then use a mechanical style eating. The second is for someone who is struggling with an eating disorder. We can't just say, trust your hunger cues, because their eating disorder brain is saying, no.
Right.
So, that is another example where we would use mechanical eating or just eating by the clock, and more, structured meal plans to help them. Just
when you say mechanical eating, is that what you mean?
Set a timer.
Yes.
No.
Eating by the clock.
Right.
Yeah. Using the clock instead of your internal hunger and fullness cues.
Right.
So yes, if someone feels like, yes, I can trust that, but if they say, I don't know, I don't think so. And then if there's medications and other scenarios or other things going on, then we would say, okay, well, most studies show that humans need to eat kind of every 2.5 to 4 hours.
So let's set
base
an
it
alarm
on
on the phone and it goes off and it's 12:30 and you need to eat now.
And then of course also dependent on their lives.
Right.
So they work, they,
Yes.
have meetings, so it also has to fit within their, schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
When you were speaking about the kids though at the table, what reflected with me, because I'm 100% that mom that's like, let's eat, like let's like fill our bodies, let's finish our plates, or not even finish your plates. I'm like, please just eat the meat. I'm like, I don't even care if you don't eat the rice or the potato. I'm like, that's fine. But I'm like, this makes you strong. And I try to have that narrative. But I find my exhaustion as a mom comes from my kids being like, I'm full. And I go back and forth and I'll be like, okay, if you're telling me you're full, I want to respect you. And then 20 minutes after I've cleaned everything and put it all away, they're like, I'm hungry. And that's so hard for me. Because I'm like, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I just made supper. I just fed you all. And now I'm hauling it out again. And so I think that's where my please eat now, because I selfishly, I'm like, I would like to then be done dinner. I would like to be done and to move on and go on with my evening instead of now. I mean, you're at my house. You've seen what it's like for me. I'm up, down, in the kitchen, out. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Well, what I hear at the dinner table often lately, because Asher used to be literally we would brag, we'd be like, he eats everything. He's the best eater. And now he doesn't want chicken. And we're like, what's going on?
Yes.
But what we'll hear then is I'm full. Okay, let's are you sure? Because once we put it away, it's away. And then again, 20 minutes later, I'm hungry. Well, I thought that you were full. Well, I'm full of that. I want something else now.
Yeah, we're going through the exact same thing. Fletcher is 5, and I think there is a level of and this child who ate everything and was not very selective and ate everything except avocados. But right now is literally not eating meat or anything. I think one thing that I remind myself is even if children eat carbohydrates all day long, they still meet their protein needs. So I remind myself to relax around that. Second is that we can't force kids to eat anything. So you're right. It's kind of okay, you're full. And you can remind them, the next meal is going to be, or the next snack is not until whenever, or maybe it's morning. So I think the other thing is, one thing that can help too is if you make a meal and a lot of the times I see parents making meals only really for their kids, like making the meals that they know their kids will eat.
Yes.
And then mom or dad or the parents or the care providers are not really ever getting the food they like too.
Yeah.
So I say, you know, it's okay to make a meal that you truly like, even if the rest of your family won't eat it. What you can do in that situation is remind them that everybody gets to enjoy the food they like. And this is a meal that, you know, mom likes. It's okay if you don't like it. You don't have to eat it, but you can have a love it or like it food on the table for them. So you can gently accommodate by not just making a whole separate meal for them. So if there is a food that you know that they'll eat every time, or maybe a vegetable that you can put on the table, or a fruit, or a slice of bread and butter. If you've made something that is a learning it food. So this is the food that they either have never had before or you know they don't like. So just gently accommodating them to say, you know, and you don't even have to identify it as a learning it food, but in your mind you're saying, oh my gosh, like, my kids are never going to eat this. Then just kind of gently accommodate that. So there's that. And then again, I'm full. I don't want, you know, XYZ, I'm done. My child does this all the time too. And then 20 minutes later, especially lately, I'm hungry. I'm full of that exact same scenario. We still have a snack before bed.
Okay.
So I remind him, snack is after bath. You can wait till snack time. So just kind of keeping the schedule so that they don't just end up grazing.
Yeah.
That said, I'm trying not to be too rigid around it too.
Yeah.
You know,
I think,
and I just don't want food to be an issue.
Yeah.
A thing. So it's hard. There's a lot of nuance and layers.
I have like some meals that I love and I know my kids don't eat. And so in that regard, I try to do it. Like if I know I have leftovers that they enjoyed, I'm like, okay, well now I'm going to make my classic one is pad thai. Like I love pad thai. My kids won't eat it. So I'm like, well, I'm going to make it because I know I have leftovers for them. Because they won't touch it. They think it looks awful. I'm like, great, more for me. I actually don't care.
Yeah.
Literally like, great, I get it twice now for lunch as well. But I think what I'm struggling with, is and this just comes down to us and our family dynamic, is that like, and we do say to them sometimes like, okay, like if you want to be full, that's fine. But like for your night snack, like we're going to pull this out again and reheat it for you.
Yeah.
And like a couple of my kids are like, great. And they'll eat it then. And I do think it's so layered because I can completely identify with being full of something, but having room for dessert, right?
Yeah.
Like I can identify with being like, I'm sick of eating this, like, or I'm done with this meal, but I know dessert is coming. So I actually want to save some room because I want that. Like I do think I will do that at the dinner table. So sometimes I try to like ease up on my kids because I'm like, they're tired of this food and they want the cookie after supper. So they're like, if I fill up on this, then I'm not going to be hungry for that. But I like some of those tips. And I think I feel a sense of freedom even hearing you be like, I tell them like snack is at this time. I'm like, great. I can be like, yeah, I put supper away. So to respect me and my time too, you can wait till nighttime snack.
Yeah. It's not going to be that far.
No.
Hey friends, Megan here. You already know that I am a loyal and obsessed Poppy Barley fan, and I was so excited to start wearing my favorite warm weather flats again. Summer is around the corner, and if you are jetting off on any fun adventures, you are going to want to listen up because I'm going to let you in on a few accessories that are going to add ease and comfort to your travels. Poppy Barley's assortment of sustainably made accessories were designed to add ease to your adventures. Explore passport holders in multiple sizes to keep you organized for flying solo or with the whole fam. Go hands-free with crossbody bags designed to hold your travel essentials and backpacks that make the perfect and most stylish carry-ons. Also perfect for travel or playing tourist in your own city if you are sticking close to home like me this summer are Poppy Barley's Ever Ease flats. Friends, these shoes are incredibly comfortable. They are made with super soft leather, memory foam insoles, and anti-blister suede lining. And select styles are also available in wide widths. Each style is ethically made using sustainable materials in an audited green energy factory, and you know we love that. Not only do they produce ethically made, fashion-forward, and functional footwear and accessories, they are a certified B Corp and people-focused company, which makes us love them even more. And you know, we have an exclusive offer for our Her community. Visit pb.shoes/herpod to subscribe to their newsletter for early access to new releases and $25 off your first purchase of $200 or more. Terms and conditions do apply.
And what you just described is called sensory satiety. Oh, shoot. I feel like there's another S. Sensory satiety something or other. But basically, it's when you're full of one thing, but you still have room for another flavor or taste.
Okay.
And again, like the dessert is usually not big enough to like fill the belly. And we really want to be careful, again, not to cause this idea that you have to eat certain things to earn the dessert.
Yeah.
So sometimes we even have families practice putting the dessert on the table with the other food, and then just really practicing, here's dinner, you don't have to eat it, especially if they're really, complaining about it or have thoughts. Reminding the children that you don't have to eat it. Like, this is dinner, you can decide what you're going to eat and how much of it. But also, just kindly say, I don't care for that. Like, we're not going to push it and force it. If dessert is part of the meal, make it part of the meal, not something they have to earn. Because that starts to create this hierarchy of foods where, dessert is the quote unquote, you have to earn it.
It's like bad.
It's bad.
Yeah.
It's less nourishing. And, the other foods are good and better. And so when we create that hierarchy, we risk creating moralization around it. We also teach kids that, so the parents will, think, I'm going to bribe you with dessert. And then the children think, wow, that food must be really terrible. You're bribing me with dessert. Like, they know.
Yeah.
So we come up with all these tips and tricks, and really they can see right through it. But it does start to create, disjoint their relationship to food. And so it's hard to wrap your head around it, but it's sort of making the dessert food or the sweet foods or the, what people might deem quote unquote junk foods, as morally equal to vegetables, fruit, meats, beans, other types of foods. They're not nutritionally equal. Like, let's get that straight.
Right.
And kids need a variety of foods to grow, but they are morally equal. It's just food, and all food serves a purpose. What I was going to go back to is that at the base of the pyramid, when it comes to healthy bodies, healthy growth and development, healthy aging, is getting enough to eat.
Yes.
Is adequacy. And all the other rules, like around balance and variety and individual foods that have, unique health benefits, are kind of moot if you're not eating enough. So this has helped me let go a little bit of my own 5-year-old's diet and just ensuring, and sometimes when he's asking for the same things, at the end of the day, and he's already eaten it, you've already had one of those, can we pick something different? And I might give him options. Kids want autonomy, right? They want to know that you are listening to them. They want to know that you trust their body. So yeah, the more that we can say, okay, you're full, like, just believe them, even if you think, oh, you're bullshitting.
I'll be making toast in 5 minutes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
I think, that'll be the piece for me is being like, that's cool, but now you wait.
Yeah.
It's
to
okay
it,
to have a bit of a schedule or routine. And even that, if it's in the middle of the day, you might waver a little bit more. And again, there's so much nuance and layers. We don't want to be so rigid that we're really, harming or hurting them. But a lot of the time they just need a different distraction or, it's complicated. I think a lot of layers and nuance as we help children to grow into this idea where you can trust your body, you can trust your hunger cues if you have them. You know when you're full, when you've had enough of food. Also think about, imagine your spouse telling you as an adult, no, just have one more bite, just try it. You didn't even try it and that you don't like something.
Right.
Or, just come on, you got to eat a little bit more. And you're like, I just really don't want, like, it would be so demeaning.
Right.
Well, that's a good reflection.
I want you on your page shared a stat that I wanted to talk about. And I'm going to read it here quickly so I get it right. That eating disorders are 2 to 4 times more prevalent in Canadian children than type 2 diabetes. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, that was a post. So Eating Disorder Awareness Week in Canada is February 1st to 7th. So we posted that. And as a reminder that there is so much messaging and I think fear-mongering around children's size and shape. And just as a reminder that a lot of the public health messaging is around quote-unquote healthy bodies, preventing type 2 diabetes, and not at all talking about food relationship and disordered eating and eating disorders in kids as young as 8 years old. Wow. You know, and I think there are about 1 million people in Canada with diagnosed eating disorder, which is highly under reported, partly because the DSM criteria is pretty it serves a purpose and it's definitely important, but it's pretty rigid. And so this is where we see disordered eating and eating disorders as a spectrum. And it doesn't really matter. A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm not sick enough. I don't have the diagnosis. It's like, no, you are sick enough because you are here and you're saying that you engage in disordered eating.
What is the difference between disordered eating and an eating disorder?
Yeah. And like I said, it's a spectrum, but it would be, for example, any kind of rigid food rules. So at Food to Fit Nutrition, we feel things like a lot of the dieting rules that you might see as disordered. Very normalized in our society, but disordered.
Can you give us an example?
Just hesitating so that I don't trigger anybody.
We can put a trigger warning.
We can put a trigger warning in this episode.
Okay.
Or you can say trigger warning right now.
So disordered eating would be things like rigidly tracking calories and macronutrients. And it can become really disordered because people start to ignore hunger and fullness cues just to meet the number. Disordered eating would be cutting out foods that you would normally eat within your diet that are deemed now bad, off limits. I can't, I shouldn't. So again, that restriction and that pressure to avoid.
Okay.
It would be disordered eating could be restricting, whether it's accidental or intentional during the day, and then feeling like you're binging at night. And I say feeling like because a lot of people will come to us saying, I binge at night. And it's not actually a diagnosed clinical binge based on the DSM criteria, but they feel like it's a binge. And so it's important. And the other thing is that binge is so loosely used that people will feel like 3 cookies is a binge, and it's not. That's actually just pretty normal eating. So a lot of the time we are trying to remove the distress around eating, no matter where it's coming from. So if someone comes to us and they feel distress, anxiety, pressure, fear around food and eating, there's something going on. So we would try to remove that. And sometimes it just needs some context. There's so much messaging out there that's rooted in ableism, that's rooted in wellness, that's rooted in whitewashing. So whitewashing would be basically culturally appropriating a food and making the quote unquote healthier version. So like healthy tacos, for example. It's like, no, that's someone's culturally relevant and important food.
I never even thought of that.
It's like when you go to Pinterest and you're like tacos, then it's like the healthiest, easiest tacos. Like, is that what you mean? Like someone has deemed that this is healthy for you.
Yes.
Or like, this is my healthy.
Yeah.
So you just,
especially coming from a thin white provider who's not part of that culture.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, okay. I get it. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So that's disordered eating, but eating disorders, is that the quote unquote classic, like we're thinking of anorexia, bulimia? Is that in that category?
Yeah. So there's anorexia nervosa, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and ARFID, which is avoidant restricted food intake disorder. And there are these categories, and sometimes people don't fit perfectly into one of these categories. So that's what we see a lot too. So what we're trying to say is that if you think you have problematic eating, or if you think that your eating is starting to affect your life and your ability to engage in the world and be present, or is affecting your relationships, or if you feel that you might have an eating disorder, it's enough. There's something going on and you deserve care. You don't have to be quote unquote sick enough. You don't have to meet the DSM criteria to be, worthy of care and treatment.
I imagine that it takes somebody a while to come to you on their own who's having navigating an eating disorder or disordered eating. Mm-hmm. And that's wonderful when they do. I'm curious how we can support people in our lives, a loved one, a partner, a child who is navigating that and is not ready to take the help or do that, take the step to come in to see you. How can we navigate for people in our lives?
I think the first thing I want to say is to know that if it's a loved one, you didn't cause this. I think parents can hold a lot of guilt or shame that they might have contributed. And we just want to, it's not helpful thinking. And eating disorders are very complex. While we know that weight discrimination and dieting and body dissatisfaction can be part of developing an eating disorder, it can also relate to trauma, childhood trauma, perfectionism. It can overlap with other mental health diagnoses. And it can also be a coping mechanism for other things that are going on in that person's life. So that's the first thing. Secondly, one of the best things you can do is just listen, not try to fix. Definitely not try to fix, not try to get them to eat right off the bat without help from a provider. Just listen.
Okay.
Yeah. And just hear them, just talk to them, help them to open up. And if they won't open up, just remind them that you are there to listen non-judgmentally and not to provide any advice or feedback at any time. And that's like kind of the first thing. Mm-hmm. Remind them it's not their fault either. When people have disordered eating or eating disorders or food relationship issues, it's not their fault. If they have complex food relationship, it's not their fault. There's so many factors that can affect that. So that's kind of going back to how trauma can affect nutrition indirectly.
I'm curious then, because as you were talking, and you were talking about like good food or bad food, and I'm like, I'm identifying with some of these things. I'm like, would you say that a lot of society has a level of disordered eating?
Yes.
Like that's literally what I'm sitting here thinking.
And I'm like,
I feel like every person to some extent has some sort of something that they could identify with.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's so prevalent. And so even when you think about supporting someone who's struggling with their food relationship or with eating an eating disorder, little things like commenting on your own body or somebody else's body, no matter what it might be, a weight change, size or shape. If someone who's struggling with their relationship to food hears that, that can be, contributing to their harm, or contributing to harm towards them. Again, something that is so normalized, and nobody does it to intentionally hurt or harm somebody. Or actually, that's not true, because people do use words to like fat to describe people as a form of like hurt. And so that is a societal construct. Fat is just a descriptor. Like you have fingers, you have fat, you have long hair. However, the difference between you have fingers and you have long hair is those words to describe a body. You are tall, you are shorter, are rarely used as to weaponize against somebody else or to hurt somebody else. However, we learn from a very young age that the word fat is a weapon and is a bad word. So to unwrap that, we want to use it as a neutral descriptor. Now, as someone like myself who is a thin provider and has thin privilege, so in other words, my genetic size, I have to be careful with how I use the word fat because not everybody has taken it back as a neutral descriptor.
Right.
For people in higher weight bodies who describe themselves as fat, they're just describing themselves as a neutral descriptor. But a lot of people have yet to do that work. So I will use the language that the person feels comfortable with. But we need to let kids know that fat isn't a bad word.
Okay. How do you start that work?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I have started with my own child, and we were in Costco once, and at the time Fletcher was 3, maybe early 4, and he had said, "Mom, look at that fat man." Yeah. And I thought very quickly, okay, how I respond is so important. So in an instant, I said, "Yeah, Fletcher, people come in all shapes and sizes. It's interesting, isn't it? However, it's not okay to comment on people's bodies."
Yes.
And that was it. And so that's often the thing is people come in different shapes and sizes. Body diversity is a good thing. Don't comment on people's bodies. It's not an okay thing to do. It's not something that we do. So if that's, I think, the starting point, there's so much behind it. But yes, I would say that's a good place to start.
I would love to know some other maybe statistics around diet or nutrition that you think either deserve to be in the limelight. You're like, this is not talked about enough and people need to know either what's going on or what's happening, or things that you think our listeners would find interesting.
So I think one of the biggest things that I want to shed light on regarding that stat, children are 2 to 4 times more likely to have an eating disorder than type 2 diabetes, is it really speaks to the level of weight bias in our society, in the medical industry. And this is harming people. It's not just harming people in higher weight bodies, it's harming all bodies. Because there is a fear of gaining weight, there is a fear of higher weight bodies, there is such an incessant desire to lose weight to reach a higher status. And, for anyone who desires weight loss, that's okay. It's not your fault. We have to really realize that the reason behind that is so loaded. And as a thin white provider myself, I can't relate, and I can only recognize my own privileges, the way that I move around in the world. People in all size bodies can experience body shaming. However, people in higher weight bodies experience oppression and daily microaggressions, or they can, and certainly I hear different parts of the story. Not everybody in a higher weight body has experienced these things, or at least identifies as experiencing things, but that's the biggest difference. So the driver of some of these stats is, and why we focus so much on quote unquote childhood obesity as a big fear, is really nothing more than weight bias and discrimination, because there's not a lot of super great science behind it. It's association, and we cannot ignore the role that weight discrimination plays in health outcomes. It raises cortisol levels. It raises inflammation in the body. It worsens body image. It worsens mental health. It can change and increase the risk for heart disease and diabetes. So that's also the science that we need to be looking at too. We can't just be one-sided.
Well, I find that so interesting, because something I've been personally reflecting on is how in health and other aspects, how important reducing inflammation and cortisol is. right? And so I'm like, you can have this, I'm going to use air quotes, like healthy mindset, healthy thing you're trying to do. But if you have a negative relationship with it or stress around it, that actually is doing the opposite of what you want it to do.
Absolutely. No amount of goji berries are going to reduce inflammation if you're not eating enough.
Right.
So going back to that pyramid, adequacy and just getting enough to eat. So this is where, and actually studies show that dieting can raise your inflammatory levels. So for people in higher weight bodies who are struggling with restricted eating, possibly anorexia nervosa. We don't think of higher weight bodies struggling with that, and that's the bias, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And for people who are actively restricting their intake because they're constantly told to lose weight for their health, how much of that is actually worsening their health? How much of that is causing them to lose their period, for example, you know, even though they're in a higher weight body, they're over exercising, they're dieting, they've definitely tried, but that dieting and that restricted eating can certainly raise cortisol levels, inflammation, and worsen health outcomes. So one of the first questions I will ask people one of the questions I'll ask people in assessment or people who menstruate is, what is your menstrual cycle doing? So are you on a hormonal birth control or not? And if not, do you know what your cycle is? So, you know, a typical cycle would be around as early as 24 days to about 30 to 33 days. So it can be a little shorter or a little longer. If it's longer than 34 days, or if people are having fewer than 8 periods a year, then we would, you know, start to ask a little bit more questions. My first question is, do you think you eat enough? Doesn't matter what their size or shape is.
Right.
And I would say 70% of the time people identify as probably not. And so I work with people who have PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And so it's not just a hormonal condition. It's not just affecting fertility. It's very much an endocrine and metabolic condition too. So it can affect your liver enzymes. It can affect your lipids. It can affect your blood sugars. It's a really serious chronic condition. And I think we don't know enough about it. We don't know why people get it. But it can be really complicated, and there can be a lot of weight bias with that condition too. The rhetoric being lose weight to manage your symptoms, when really it doesn't make any sense, because one of the side effects, not everybody, there are smaller people in smaller bodies with PCOS, but one of the side effects of PCOS is weight gain.
Okay.
And so it's like, well, why are you targeting a side effect? You know, we should be targeting maybe
the cause,
the cause, and looking at different aspects, and whether or not someone's weight will change. It's very, very difficult for people with PCOS to change their weight and reduce it. And yet the message from most providers is to lose weight to manage your PCOS. So they're grappling with so much, as well as some pretty uncomfortable physical symptoms.
So a question that you just brought up for me when you were talking, and actually throughout this whole conversation, is talking about the bottom of the pyramid being eating enough, eating adequately. So I'm curious if you can expand on that. Like, obviously it will be, I'm assuming, different for every person, but how do we start to identify and ask questions in and of ourselves, if we're listening, of being like, am I eating enough? How do I determine that? What does that even look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually what I start with is food pattern. So again, going back to, are you eating every 3 to 4 hours ish? And usually there's some evidence that breakfast is beneficial, but the evidence is pretty weak. So if people aren't breakfast eaters, I often suggest that if they can eat at least within the first few hours of waking up, so maybe they're okay with a morning snack, but definitely their best evidence is, I would say, to break the fast. And even just practice-based evidence, whether or not there's scientific literature, I just see this in practice a lot. So people do better when they're eating more earlier in the day. Or earlier in their day. It depends if they're shift workers, but either way, breaking that fast within 2 hours of waking up. And then after that, am I eating something every, 3 to 4 hours? That's a good place to start.
I feel like we could just really continue all day, but I'm looking at the time and we have to wrap up. We are going to ask one last question, and I feel like you probably have multiple answers to this, but we love to ask our guests, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received or that you can give?
I guess based on the discussion today, I think the best piece of advice moving forward for listeners would be to start to rewrite this idea that it's okay to comment on people's bodies. To practice, and you'll mess up. I mess up. I still, because we are products of our society. But if someone has lost weight, if someone has gained weight, you don't need to comment on anybody's body, whether you know them or not. And watch your language towards your body around children. It's okay for you to be struggling with your body and your body image. I'm not saying to love your body. In fact, I'm not really a big body love promoter. That can be a big ask for people. But getting to a place where we're just not feeling the urge to comment on people's bodies. Maybe you like their shirt. Maybe you like their hair. Maybe you like their new glasses. And just reminding people why you also like them. You know, you're just such a great friend. You're such a good listener. I really appreciate you. You know, I appreciate your laugh. You just, you know, bring a light. You make me laugh. Thank you so much. You make me feel cared for. Everything else, why those people have really good qualities. I would say that's the first place that we can all start, is just, you know, hesitating before we feel the urge to comment. We really don't know what's going on for that person. So commenting on your own body, other people's body, or directly to another person is just not appropriate. And it's something that we can, I think, rewrite for the future.
Can you, for our listeners who don't know you yet, now you do, but can you tell them where they can find you on socials and how they can work with you and your team?
Yes. So they can find us on Instagram at food2fit_nutrition. My personal is at Brooke Bulloch RD, and food2fit.ca. So I have a team. We have an office in Regina and Saskatoon, and we're online. We have a pediatric dietitian. We have dietitians working in functional gut and inflammatory bowel disease. We have dietitians working in eating disorders, as well as autoimmune conditions like thyroid conditions and celiac disease. And anything to do with heart health, heart disease management, or reducing risk of, or whatever. So many aspects. It's a lot of moving parts, but yes, food2fit.ca is a great place to start.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being here, Brooke.
It was such a pleasure. It's there's never one straight answer. So it's a lot to kind of talk about, but hopefully listeners get a feel for how sessions might go. It's a lot of listening. Yeah. A lot of holding space.
Amazing.
So good. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate being here. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.
Bye.
Bye. Adios.